So what is the crack? This video is going to give you just a brief overview of the my planning process for the rest of the off season, the pre-season, the start of the transition period between pre-season and competition, and the start of the competition period as well. Difficult at the moment because nobody really knows what the story is going to be with regards to when games actually start or when championships going to start. At the time of recording this, it's now the 10th of December, and the thoughts is that it could be either before or after the intercounty championship, which will be run in obviously the summer months. So we're either looking at a April time, or we're looking at a late August, September, October time, similar to what happened in 2020. With that in mind, I've planned it for a 4th of April start. So that's our first championship game, so the first Sunday in April. The likelihood is that it's more than likely going to be on the 4th of April, just with things looking up for next year with the vaccine and whatnot. We're assuming that it's going to be the 4th of April. On top of that, it's actually easier to plan for a nearer time than it is for a further away time, because if you plan for further, you kind of trick yourself into thinking you got more time, whereas in, I suppose, 2 months' time, if they tell you that actually it's being brought forward to the 4th of April or April time, then you're kind of caught because you haven't planned appropriately for that window. At least if we plan for the nearer time and it kind of gets extended to late summer, then we can deal with that. That's fine. And even if we plan for what we have at the moment, and it gets brought forward maybe 2 to 4 weeks, we can plan and we can deal with that as well, because there is some flexibility within this as well. This is my thought process to it. This isn't exact. This is what I deem is going to be more beneficial for us with doing this year in the off season and preseason, what we need to work on. This doesn't take into account the pitch-based stuff with coaching and the technical and the tactical side of things. So I've left that out completely. I'm looking at this through the lens of the S&C side of things only, with a little bit of, I suppose, thought about the pitch side of things, but I'm not going to talk about that now because, one, as a club, we haven't really spoken about it yet either, and at the moment, this is what's actually more important at the moment, and this is what needs to get done. Now, with all that said, here we go. I know you might be able to see it on the video, but what I'll try and do is I'll try and work some magic, and I'll put this image on the screen somewhere so you can actually look and follow along with it at the same time. The whole point of the video is just to give you a little bit of an overview and to, I suppose, an insight into the thought process that goes into these things. So, start from the top. The easiest way to plan for something is to know what your end goal is, know what you want to get out of the time that you have and where the destination is of your endpoint. Unless you do that, you're kind of guessing, you're not able to plan effectively because your end goal isn't clear and concrete, whereas mine is at the moment. So we're looking to peak for our championship on the 4th of April. We know based on last year what we need to work on, and the major things that we need to work on is building size and strength in lads who maybe before this year didn't have an awful lot of exposure to gym work, and bringing or bridging the gap between some of the minor and under 21s and our top level senior players. At all times, what I'm trying to do is get these lads to the top of their game, and the benchmark for these lads is always going to be intercounty standard, because that's the elite of their chosen sport and at their grade. So anytime we're planning for something or we're working towards a goal, the benchmark and the standard is not us as a club, it's actually the top level, the elite standard, so we can constantly strive to get there. At least then, even if you don't get there, you're going to be pretty close, and it's going to be at a better standard or a better level of those around you in terms of other teams. we're not concerned about any other team except for ourselves, and we're looking to get the best out of this year and kind of push on from where we were last year and go one better hopefully in 2021. So we've got our stages here. So we have our off season, we've got our early pre-season, our mid to late pre-season, our transition period, and our peaking phase as well. Each of these different phases have their different priorities and different focuses. With the off season at the moment, we're actually not doing any pitch sessions. The lads have been working away doing their own gym sessions between lockdowns as well. It's been a little bit more difficult, but they've had gym equipment at home. They've had access to the gym either side of the lockdown period for 6 weeks. So we've been working away on that with the aerobic fitness and stuff in mind. We've had them on the tempo template that I have as well, and lads are working off that just to maintain some level of sprint technique, aerobic fitness, and running as well, because what we don't want to do is have them not have done anything since September, mid to late September, and then come back in December or early January onto the pitch, and then it's their first exposure to higher speed running or running in general, and then straight away you're kind of breaking lads down too fast, and we don't want that to happen. So keeping some level of running in there is key, and they're only doing maybe 1 to 2 sessions a week with the running, and then 2 to 4 gym sessions a week as well. There's an optional 5th day in there if they wanted to do it, but it's more just upper body and core, and chances are if it's just core it's not going to get done, but that's fine. So we're going to finish Christmas week 19-20 December, which gives us from now about today's the 10th, so it gives us another 9 or 10 days of work to get done to finish off the first phase of our gym sessions that we're doing, to set the foundation for the first 3 weeks of 2021, and we get a lot of our work done. I'll get a lot of my work done. So that gives us the early pre-season. So it's the 4th of January to the 18th and 19th of January. Give or take, it's the same time we started last year with on-pitch sessions. It was around the 21st of January last year, which was a Saturday. Gives 16 days. So 16 days, and that would give maybe 16 days, 4 rest days, gives you 12 days. So it gives you between 8 and 12 gym sessions between the start of the year and when we do our first coaching session on the pitch. With that in mind, if you go down here, the programs that I have set for that period of time is going to be our hypertrophy clusters. I've spoken about them quite recently on my Instagram stories, and I've spoken about them on the podcast as well. So if you haven't listened to that, go back and listen to it and give you a deeper insight into why we use them. The goals are hypertrophy, so size, but we want to maintain some level of athleticism without having to add in a lot of plyos or jumps or throws or any higher intensity activity. We don't want to add them in just yet because we want to prioritize hypertrophy and size. The inclusion of clusters. The inclusion of clusters allows us to do that. It allows us to accumulate a lot of volume, but use a weight that is going to facilitate faster movement speeds, so we can maintain some level of athleticism and power without having to directly work on it, which is great. First 16 days, so 2 weeks and 2 days. Then you move into your mid to late preseason, which is going to be your largest period of time. So from the 19th of January roughly to the 14th of March, it's 55 days. So it's 8 weeks worth of preseason. That's where you're going to get a lot of your game or your preseason games in, a lot of your on-pitch games, a lot of your coaching, your technical and your tactical work as well. In this period, so for the first 3 to 4 weeks, I'll have a heavy influence on what actually goes on with regards to conditioning on the pitch, gym sessions and stuff like that. And as we get closer and closer to the first game of the season, my level of involvement or the amount of time that I have contact time wise will start to get smaller, which is fine. But I'll address this down here somewhere. It's funny, I wrote this out the other day, but I haven't read back over it since. With our where are we down to mid to late preseason down here. So the program I have in mind to run is going to be I actually have it written down there. So it's Strong and Fast AF. That's just the name of the program. I'm not going to go into detail about them now. It's going to be 8 weeks I'm going to run it 2 cycles, so it's actually a 4-week program, but I'm going to run it twice. We're not going to do any testing throughout this period at all, because the training sessions themselves are going to be the testing. So I'll be able to monitor lads as they go along, regardless of what weights they're using, and see are they moving in the right direction. I don't want to do a testing session because it sounds stupid, but it actually takes out a session, and that session would probably be best used doing something else that's going to move the needle. Will a testing session for this specific group be beneficial? Probably not, because it's their first proper year of a structured S&C plan, and they're still improving anyway. So they don't really need the testing. They don't really need very specific percentage-based sessions. The sessions are still percentage-based, but it's more flexible, so that you can add more weight on if it starts to feel a little bit easier, which is great. What's this? So it's about 2 or 3 days a week, because we're going to be doing more pitch-based sessions. We're going to have to just adjust that load. So up here, you're doing 4 or 5 days in the gym, and then when you get down here into mid to late preseason, you're only looking at maybe 2 or 3. It's a strength maintenance, and still looking at hypertrophy in the early part of that, but we're focusing and we're transitioning towards more power based and more maybe Olympic lifts, more focus on movement speed as opposed to training volume, because again, when we're out on the pitch, we're having an awful lot of training volume anyway as well, so we just got to monitor that as well. Mid to late preseason brings us all the way up to the 14th of March and around Paddy's Day, so bank holiday weekend. So it's a good time then to move into our transition period where training volume actually comes down. So just before Paddy's Day, it's going to be bank holiday weekend. If things were normal, pubs would be opened, lads would be going out that weekend. So it's a great time to have something to aim for in that time. So you get to the 14th of March and you go, you know what, we've worked really hard over the last 8 weeks, go and enjoy yourself. And it starts the transition period between the 14th of March and the 28th of March. So it's 14 days, so it's a 2-week period where the volume of sessions in the gym actually comes way down. The intensity stays relatively high. Movement speed stay high, but volume of lifts actually goes way down. So you're almost talking about dropping your reps down to like 2 to 4, taking a set off pretty much everything, not looking for any higher rep sets at all. And the games, which I'll address in a few moments, will have to accommodate for that as well, because that's their deload 2 weeks, and then we head into our peaking week, which would be the 29th of March to the 4th of April. During this one, the game itself is the most important. I have it down, it's all the way down over here, so max velocity sprinting to maintain that, and the game is going to be the priority. So we're starting to nail down our game plan. Lads know their jobs. We're just starting to get, I suppose, mentally ready for that week, and we have a whole week devoted to it as well. The thing with the deal or the transition period as well, between the transition and the peaking week, that's where the flexibility comes in, because if we find out that the championship is being brought forward, we've got a buffer here of about 2 weeks. So we still have all of the bulk of our work done in this 55 days, so just short of 8 weeks. And if we needed to, we could shorten this by a couple of days, so maybe go to 10 days. We'd still keep our peaking week of 7 days, and we could just buffer this day out, so maybe take a couple of days off this. So there's flexibility built into this for us as a management group to be able to comfortably deal with getting thrown a curveball really late and be like, okay, you need to prep yourself for 2 weeks earlier. Likewise, on the flip side of that, if it gets extended out, you'll have just an extended preseason, and that can be, again, accounted for as well. Now, I've covered all those. So when we get down here to the transition period, so like I spoke about, the priority during that 14 to 21 days. So I've actually included the peaking week in this as well. So 14 to 21 days, you microdose daily. So every time they come in, they're doing some form of max sprinting, some form of jumps, sprints, or throws, just to maintain the higher velocity work and high outputs, but keep volume nice and low, so we can stay fresh while we allow that fatigue that we've built up during the bulk of our preseason, just allow that to kind of just start to dissipate, and then we can start to kind of realize those gains in strength, speed, and fitness and not have to worry about kind of carrying that fatigue into our first game of the season. It's actually lashing rain outside, so I might just pause for a moment and hopefully that it doesn't affect it too much.
Okay, this is less than ideal, but we'll go with it anyway. The rain just got far too bad outside, and what I'll do is I'll leave the board on the screen and I'll just go through the last bit anyway because it's just short, and that is going to be the pitch focus during the same phases that I've explained with regards to the gym work, because obviously we're not just going to be in the gym all the time, we also have to get back out on the pitch. As I explained in the introduction, I'm actually not going to go through any of the technical or tactical stuff. It's purely from a conditioning point of view and from a S&C point of view that I'm looking at this. During the off season, as I said, there's no pitch sessions. We're doing the individual extensive tempo template, and everybody has been fairly bang on with getting them done. As of this moment in time, I think we are at week 7 or 8 maybe. So another 4 weeks to go with a break at Christmas, and then we'll see where we go from there with individuals condition when people come back. When I get the first couple of pitch sessions done in the early pre-season, I'll be able to identify individuals who need a little bit more work, and then we might prescribe them just individual sessions based on that as well. I think after the success of last year with regards to our conditioning, I don't think I'll actually have to prioritise it an awful lot, and we can do the bulk of our conditioning work through small-sided games, which I will do. So during the early pre-season, I'm going to start to introduce the small-sided games early. So these are going to be pretty much uncoached games. They're going to be conditioning games with certain conditions on them. So one that springs to mind working on conditioning but also on communication is you have a 4v4 game set up as normal, but you identify one of the 4 players who is only allowed to speak, and this just has the effect of building communication with certain players who might be quiet in the group, and if they're the ones that are designated to speak, no one else can, and obviously you put a penalty on if someone else outside of that designated speaker says anything. And it just provides a way of getting these people out of their shells and to improve their communication skills and not be afraid to maybe say something or organise a more senior player in the squad, because what we want now is just to have everybody as leaders on the pitch and not have to rely on 1 or 2 people all the time. With the off season as well, I meant to say just at the very end, we'll obviously expose them to high speed running. It's more or less built into the tempo template. So high speed run is done anything that's above 17.5, 18 kilometers an hour, and all of our tempo runs are done at least 18. So we've covered the high speed running, and that just has the added on effect of building more robust athletes and more, I suppose, robust hamstrings, so we're not kind of nursing hamstring injuries all year, because nobody wants one of them. With the small-sided games, we're going to start big and work smaller, so have bigger pitches, bigger numbers. The bigger numbers work to, I suppose, reduce the intensity of the game, because as an individual, you're probably having to cover less distance. There's less change of direction in the larger sided games. The ball will do an awful lot more of the work because it'll cover like longer distances. And over that first 2 weeks, we'll start to bring them smaller and smaller. So we might start with won't start with a 15-15. So we might start with a 9v9, then for 2 sessions, then a 7v7, then 4v4s, and then maybe 2v2. So by the time they get to the first actual pre-season session around the 19th of January. They're well used to the small city games, and there's a certain amount of intensity that's been built up with a very little focus on technique. But now, because there's a base level of conditioning within the game and our coaches start to take over, we can start to hone in on those skills while already having a base level of fitness, so you're not having to try and do both at the same time. Because what happens is you set up small city games in the hope that the quality is going to be very good, and because it's more of a focus on conditioning, the skills can sometimes kind of let you down because you're carrying so much fatigue, and it's just a way of kind of, I suppose, mitigating that whole confrontation between players and coaches when the quality mightn't be so high, and it's just a case of getting those bad ones out of the way. We'll have certain agility circuits, so we'll introduce some. We'll start with curved running, and we'll start to ramp up the angles and the degrees of the turns and the speed at which they do them at, so they're not kind of just being dumped straight into change of direction stuff. It was probably a mistake I made last year, was not doing enough of change of direction stuff before the small city games started. As you bring the small city games smaller and smaller in numbers and in pitch size, the number of, I suppose, accelerations and the number of changes of direction will actually increase as well. We'll introduce some extensive plyometrics and longer distance high speed running. So anybody who's followed me on social media for a while will see things like tuck jumps, pogo jumps, hops, and the skips, the power skips, and bits and pieces like that. Just implementing some power movements on the pitch, which will feed over into our sprint technique running and the longer distance high speed running, just to top up on the tempo runs, but we'll do it a little bit faster over longer distance and get them a little bit more break, so that they're used to covering 80, 100 meters. As the pre-season goes on, those distances will get shorter and they'll be more specific to the game, but that's as the pre-season progresses. The gradual intro to change of direction work I mentioned, and the work to rest ratios. So you're starting at least like 1-1 or 1-2. So you'll work for 2 minutes, rest for 2 minutes. And that's just so that because we'll have the aerobic work done, we should be recovering relatively quickly between these sessions anyway. And that's just to ensure that when the lads go back into each game, that they're more or less fully recovered. As we move on, we'll flip towards the end, so you'll end up working for maybe 2 minutes, resting for 1, and that'll just be it almost switches the energy system demand. So we've gone from a predominantly aerobic based session to more, I suppose, glycolytic and lactate based, because our recovery times aren't long enough, but that's more specific to the game. And it's just to expose these lads to that type of work so that they can become more comfortable with that kind of burning sensation, and their bodies get more accustomed to being able to use the lactate for fuel and to be able to tolerate that burning sensation as well. The bulk of the pre-season work from my perspective will be small sided games, so focusing on maybe 1v1s up to 4v4s, whether that the conditions will be different every time, but I won't go into too much detail now because it'll take too long. Maximal speed work, so if your ceiling for speed is higher, then intensity doesn't, or the intensity of your sessions isn't as high. And what I mean by that is, for example, if your top speed is 10 meters per second and you're spending the majority of your time running at like 6 to 7 meters per second, that's 60 to 70% of your maximum, which 60 to 70% isn't that intense. Whereas if your max speed is 7.5, 8.5, maybe in that range, like your if you're trying to maintain 6 to 7 meters per second to keep up with everyone else, that now is pushing 85 to 95%, which is extremely intense. And that specific individual is going to burn out faster. They're not going to be able to last as long, and their skills are going to go to shit sooner, which is obviously going to be negative on the rest of the team. And that's why the maximum speed work is so important, so that you can build your speed reserve, and it makes the intensity of sessions a lot less intense and broadens the window for, I suppose, flexibility within that you can push it a little bit more than if you need to, and you have that extra bit of energy to go then when you really, really do need it. We'll start to introduce some intensive plyos, so that more of the bounds and the longer or the higher drops, so drop jumps from a higher height, and we'll only do these every so often because they will be quite intense, but these are going to translate into being more elastic and faster athletes as well, and more powerful. There will be a large focus on the technical and tactical part of the game as we try and get our game plan right during this part of the preseason, and that is going to take up the majority of the time, and therefore a lot of the stuff that I'm doing here will be microdosed, and it will be very small, high intensity but low volume, and that's what we just got to work out, or got to look out for. In the transition phase, then we're moving into that 2-week period I spoke about. So tempo runs, so more aerobic base, so that we can start to dissipate some of that fatigue. Bit more mobility, so lads who are kind of nursing niggles or feeling it in the hips or the hamstrings. Bit more mobility focus session. The larger sided, small sided games, they'll be very, very short with long rest. That's just to keep the technical side of the game high and keep them, I suppose, the minds tuned into the skills that they're going to have to be doing without removing the game altogether. And we can really, really dial in on the tactical approach to the game. So that's when you're going through certain walkthroughs, puck outs, set pieces like your 65s, sidelines, and bits and pieces like that, penalties, all the things that you really do need to work on. And down the bottom, you can't really, or you might be able to see it, it's your peaking phase, where we have to keep in some max velocity sprinting. And the biggest mistake people do before the game is that they don't actually sprint, so that you feel slow and sluggish when you get into the game. Maximal speed has a residual of about 5 days plus or minus 2, which means when you sprint and you increase your speed, it's got a very short window for improvement or detraining. So you do have to dose it quite often. It doesn't need a whole pile of volume, but it does need to be intense. And I spoke about it before, it needs to be 95% plus of your maximal speed. So we'll integrate some of that into our peaking week and the game. So we'll be going over the game, and we'll be dialing right in on people's jobs, and I suppose from a management perspective as well, like who's doing what job on match days. So that's basically it. That is from start to finish how I envision this pre-season and the championship setup working. There will be changes to this. There will be times where we won't be able to get quite as much done, but this gives us a framework to work from. Each specific section of the I suppose the overall macro cycle has a specific focus. I haven't gone right into detail with it because that's just, I'm not going to go into that detail with it, but hopefully this gives you an idea of the level of specificity that you need to have when you're planning out this. So whether you're a coach who's planning pre-season, or your whole entire year is basically in this. It's nearly up on 30 minutes now, so it gives you a bit of an insight into it. But that covers an awful lot of a yearly plan. This is very specific to this year, obviously, because of the dates, but that's the way I'm looking at it from my position as the S&C coach, and physically having these lads prepared to play as many games as hurling as it needs to win a championship in 2021. And I will go into a little bit more detail on one of the next episodes of the podcast regarding the pre-season and the running and what needs to be focused on. But for now, hopefully you found that useful. Let me know if you want me to go into detail about anything else, but thank you very much for watching, and I will chat to you guys soon.